All right, Tom Shepstone with us here. It is Natural Gas Now, correct, is the name of the website?
That's right, naturalgasnow.org.
.org, that's right. I got to pull it up here because I wanted to see what the lead story is, but I've been following some of the stories that you had. I actually, there was a story you had out a couple days ago I saw on LinkedIn, and I never know if it's from you or from one of your other people, but it had to do with basically the subsidy war is over, or the losing proposition and the subsidies, something like that.
That's correct. That was a post we reposted actually from the Institute of Energy Research, and I thought it was very good because it got at the whole idea that these. I think it was Herbert Stein said when he worked for Reagan or one of our presidents said, at some point you run out of other people's money. Well, I know Margaret Thatcher said that too, but the subsidies have gone on for so long. I mean, it's just becoming patently obvious at this point that it can't continue, and a lot of states have ratcheted them down, and the federal government is appearing to want to do that as well. Although that could change if the final results of the election aren't, what I hope they would be. But.
And this was the Institute for Energy Research.
Right.
Okay.
They're
And
an industry group, and they've actually got 3 sites. One is the Institute's own site, and then there's the founder of the group has a site called Master Resource, and then there's a political group as well called American Energy Alliance. So we repost stuff from all 3 from time to time.
so election, what'd you make of the election? Do you believe it's over? Do you think Trump's still going to win? I guess where are you at with the election talk?
Well, I'm not going to be so bold as to say I think he's going to win. I don't know. I certainly hope so, and I think he's got a real shot. Alan Dershowitz, I think, was on yesterday or someplace saying, he's got 3 different routes he can go, legally speaking. And to me, it's clear as a bell that there was massive fraud. I mean, the mail-in ballots were just the most terrible idea imaginable, and COVID served as the excuse. And clearly, it invited fraud. I mean, we got 4 ballots sent to our home in Pennsylvania. 4 ballots, and we didn't use any of them, But you can see how easy it was to do fraud. It's just, and we didn't request them. They were mailed to everybody in Pennsylvania who had an address at one time or another, and you know how it works. So my hope is that Trump will win, and even if he doesn't win, I hope he will fight it, as John Voight said, and before him, Muhammad Ali said, to the last punch.
It certainly seems like they are. I mean, he's still soliciting for campaign funds, except for it's kind of switched to lawyer funds now, it looks like, because they're fighting all these different court battles. And then I'll get an email, hey, we've won in Georgia or we've won in Pennsylvania or something like that, the courts. And so it's you're in the media, so you know as well as I do that there's just something about this that just seems like it's not over yet.
Correct.
And I don't know what that means.
Well.
I don't know what that means, but it just seems like it's just not done at this juncture. It's just there's something more to come.
Well, it was maybe a month ago. Maybe it was prior. I think it was just prior to the election that. So it wasn't quite a month ago, but I remember reading someplace that somebody said, I don't think that 2020 is done yet surprising us. So I believe that to be true still today, that 2020 is not done surprising us. So we'll see. Well, who knows?
You're out there in Pennsylvania, right on the New York border, if my memory serves me correct.
That's correct.
And so you're in the heart of coal and Pennsylvania energy, as well as I hate energy from New York and Pennsylvania blue folks. So it's an interesting neighbors you got there.
We're right in the maelstrom.
Yeah.
And you're right. We're right next door to one of the best shale region in the country, really, which is the northeastern Pennsylvania, Susquehanna County. That's where that's the biggest gas producing county there is, really. And right next to it's Bradford, which is also huge. So but we can't drill in my home county, but we're right next door, and then right on the other side of us is New York State, which is a hopeless case of a state descending into the netherworld. It's just
well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because Pennsylvania got beat up pretty good in the coal industry with the jobs losses and that economy, and then of course New York implemented that. I think didn't they get rid of natural gas or fracking, or they just flat out?
They put a ban, a permanent ban.
So I guess those industries kind of got hit over the last decade before COVID and before the Whiting Chesapeake layoffs last year and all that other stuff. So. What's the vibe like out there, whether it's Biden or Trump or just for the oil and gas industry in general? What's the vibe out there on the East Coast?
Well, I think it's some cautious optimism. I mean, people are frustrated by the low prices, but they haven't been so low recently. I mean, they're back up to around $3, and the smart and nimble companies are able to make money at $3. So. You mentioned Chesapeake. Chesapeake was a bloated company, and it had to, it couldn't go on as long and survive because it just wasn't in a position to be competitive. Whereas a Cabot Oil and Gas is smaller, more nimble, more careful with its money, more adaptable, more flexible, and I think they're doing just fine. So. Certainly, they can make money at they could make money at $2 gas. Now, of course, we were below that for a little bit, but now it's back up to $3, and I'm sure they're building their cash back up, and they'll be back at it shortly.
Yeah.
Not that they've discontinued altogether; they haven't. But
what was the final on that pipeline out there Dominion had? Did Warren Buffett buy that, or somebody picked that up?
Yeah,
right?
I believe he did. That one's. He has bought one of the pipelines and invested in it, which always makes me suspicious. He's a train guy more than a pipeline guy, but I guess he's hedging his bets now. So we had two major pipelines through from West Virginia down through Virginia. One was the Atlantic Coast, that may have been. I'm trying to remember if that was the Dominion one or not. But anyway, that has been put aside for the moment, and one of the others has been Warren Buffett has invested in, apparently. So we'll see what happens. I'm not a big Buffett fan. I don't know what you think. He's obviously active out there in the back and hauling oil in our direction, which is fine for me. But
with BNSF.
Yeah. Right. And
when he bought that pipeline out in the East Coast, that's I don't know. I think some of these guys sometimes they're on a different level of insider trading because on one hand they're telling you that this industry is gonna be awful, and then companies buy and then they go buy them up. So
exactly. He's been doing that forever. And his son has the Novo Foundation. His son, Peter Buffett, has this, typical trust funder. He inherits, he's the benefactor of the old man's money. And apparently Warren Buffett doesn't live that extravagantly, but he's made a lot of money, given a lot of money away, and he's put a lot of it under the Novo Foundation, which is run by his son, the trust funder. And, his son is investing in all kinds of radical politics, radical anti-energy politics. And then next thing we find out is, Buffett is, not only is he shipping oil by train, but now he wants to ship stuff by pipeline too. So I think it's exactly what you're talking about. That's why he didn't want to have amendments to the inheritance laws either. He he loved that people were forced to sell out, upon the death of the death of a founder, so because then he'd get it cheap.
Well, I did want to ask you about Shale Power. I saw that on your social media posts as well, checking out naturalgasnow.org. And Shale Power, it seems to be some sort of initiative put together by a few states to try to get some economic resurgence going through, I guess it would be through the Shale Power. So talk to me about what that post is.
Trying to leverage the power of the shale. And we're seeing more and more of that happen. I mean, Pennsylvania passed some landmark legislation. I mean, the governor was sort of forced to accept it because there was an overwhelming majority among the legislators to pass it that essentially provides some tax credits for companies that would invest based on shale. And they were, as long as they used a certain amount of natural gas, they would get a certain amount of tax credits with respect to the investment they've made. So it isn't costing anybody any taxes. What it's doing is it's giving them a break from some of the taxes they will pay. So because of their investments. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of people are now jumping on that bandwagon and saying, well, let's really see what we can do with this shale. Let's see what kind of investments we can spur in our economy based on it, because it is one of our most fantastic resources, and Pennsylvania is the number 2 natural gas producer in the country, and with some of our counties being the number 1 counties. So it's a very, very good thing to see the educational institutions joining hands with the industry and promoting this kind of activity.
Tom Shepstone, Natural Gas Now. He also puts on posts and articles and summaries from other educators and advocates, as well as other reporters and writers as well. And I'm looking at one from Jim Willis from Marcellus Drilling News.
Right.
Jim's
good
a great
friend of mine.
Oh, good. Yeah, he does a really good job actually as kind of an old school reporter, I think.
That's right. Exactly. And he's got the best nose for news. I mean, I've told him that many times. He's really got his ear close to the ground with his sources, and he's particularly good. His blog is a little different emphasis than mine, in that he reports a lot of financial news, and he's really good at sniffing that stuff out, and, checking out the transcripts of financial calls and things like that. And he really reveals a lot of great news.
He reminds me of this guy we used to have when I worked at a radio station. We had a good court reporter, a guy that would just sit and read the transcripts, and he couldn't do much else, but he could do that really well, and that was a really important role. That was a really important part of the whole news team.
Question.
And so and Jim kind of reminds me of that. He really does well in the areas that he specializes in, and I've never seen him go in other areas, so he probably would exceed in those too. But the article I'm referring to is the one about the lateral just keeps getting longer as gas footprints shrink. And it says here the well has a horizontal lateral that reaches 19,883 feet, or 3.8 miles. Have we gotten them to that far now?
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Isn't that incredible? I mean, it's hard to imagine, And I added the part about the footprint to the title and did a little explanation down at the bottom. But to me, this is so fascinating, because I have long maintained, when I first let me back up. When I first got involved in this, we were still talking about, units of like 160 acres. 160 acres, which meant, one well pad for every 160 acres, and then you'd run laterals out from that well pad. Then it went to 640, then it went to 1280, and I don't know where it is now in terms of acreage. I mean, when you go 3.8 miles out, I mean, it's an immense amount of acreage. And what that means is, you're recovering the economic value under an ever-growing piece of land with an ever smaller footprint proportionally. And I've long maintained that this is how you preserve farms and open space. You find a way to recover the economic value from that land. And gas drilling, oil drilling for that matter, is with shale is one of the most amazing ways to do that, because the amount of disturbance involved is just minuscule and getting smaller all the time. It's incredible.
Did I see where this was a record or something along those lines, or no?
Yeah, I believe it was, and they're talking about going up to 5 miles now. So that'll be the next threshold that'll be shattered. A barrier that'll be shattered.
This is absolutely incredible, and I never thought of it from that perspective before. When you're harvesting economic activity under the ground that once did before, that type of thing.
And think about other economic activity. I mean, with agriculture, you can't do that with agriculture. You can't do it with forestry. And I'm a big fan of both those industries, and you can't do it with any other type of economic development. But underground, capturing that economic value, you can do it with just the barest touch of the earth. The barest touch of the earth.
Well, what do you guys got planned for next year? Have you guys made many changes to what your daily operations are to prepare for next year? Or?
Well, I think all the companies are hedging their bets right now. I think building cash back up is the main thing right now, and that's not how the industry is. The industry is a boom and bust type thing, and it's a commodity enterprise, and so it's the same with agriculture. It's the same with steel. When you're talking about commodities, there's always a boom and bust element of those industries, and it's to use that word nimble again. It's those companies that are nimble, that are prepared for that, and don't overinvest on the theory that it's going to go on forever the way it is today. Those companies survive because they're prepared. They can react quickly. They can adapt. It's the same with farming. Same thing. The farmers who are prepared to adjust and change their production and do it quickly and adapt, those are the ones that survive.
How about 2020, looking back, anything that stands out in terms of either major theme outside of the COVID theme in your eyes?
Well,
I mean, there's a lot of things. Boy, you can go from
many things.
layoffs to all kinds of things.
I would say on the energy level, I think there's been quite a change in the attitude of environmentalists. Not that they're not still opposed to everything we do and all that, but we aren't debating water quality anymore. That battle is so won now. It's so much behind us, and I think 2020 sort of revealed that. And as we talked about when we started this phone conversation, things have changed, and people are accepting this, and they're trying to build off it now. They're recognizing that it's an industry to stay. People aren't really talking about, in 2020, trying to get rid of the industry. Some are, that are the national nutcases, so to speak. But I don't see it. The names that we used to throw around as being, the ultimate fractivists here, regionally, they're not even active anymore. They're not even out there. So I think that's something I've really noticed this year. That I think we've won a lot of battles, and there's a recognition that, hey, this is an industry that's going to be here. We saw it with the election. I mean, look at what Biden did. I mean, he stuck his foot in it numerous times with numerous things, but he came out with that, I'm going to ban fracking. I'm not going to ban fracking. Well, I might ban fracking. I'll ban it here, but not there. All those kinds of things. I mean, he really had to change his position numerous times because he was getting so much heat, and he never could sustain the anti-fracking position. And even Kamala Harris, who's a radical to the core, and had talked about absolutely banning, oil and gas everywhere for everything, in so many words. I mean, even she was forced to say, no, we're not doing that, So that was the amazing thing about 2020 to me, that we saw everything revealed in terms of the whole fracking debate, that it's over. It's over. And we're moving on.
I never thought of it, but you just brought up an excellent point, which is Joe Biden, I believe, does represent the average person when it comes to the the climate activist, which is big talker. When we're around a bunch of rooms, we're going to, living in the planet of platitudes. We're going to talk big, ban this, ban that, have this aggressive language, whatever. And then when you get to the realm of reality, because remember, the planet of platitudes, you can do whatever you want. Then you get to the realm of reality, and then you start realizing, oh, well, I guess we can't really do that. That is such a true sentiment to the average person when they go from being the, we got to save Mother Earth by banning fracking, to coming to the realization about, number one, the amount of environmental innovations that the energy industry has brought to the table, and number two, just the sheer reality of how this fear mongering and doomsday, nature is just it's overblown. In my opinion, that's what I think.
I totally agree. And there's something else that I'm right now reading a book called Apocalypse Never, which I highly recommend. It's a book by a fellow by the name of Michael Schellenberger, who is your classic, liberal leftist type when he was young, and still has those leanings clearly. But what he's done is he's completely reevaluated his position with respect to environment and energy issues. Completely, he's a big fan of nuclear energy, by the way. But he's also he's not, at least as far as I've read yet, he's not adamantly anti-oil and gas. As a matter of fact, he recognizes that in the real world, oil and gas, helps deal with all the things that he's always been concerned about, and he uses Africa and Indonesia and places like that for a lot of his examples, and he points out that it just isn't realistic to try to impose these crazy solutions. For example, he talks about Peter Buffett. Peter Buffett, invested in Africa, in the Congo, in a hydroelectric dam, which is kind of a nice idea. It generates some energy for these folks, so they don't have to go out and burn down the forest to make charcoal or whatever. And that was the idea. That's what motivated him. And he thought, well, we'll find them another way to supply electricity. Well, it worked to a point. But what happened was the only people who could afford the electricity were the rich people who didn't really need it, So because they had other options, and he concludes, we've got to. The only way we're going to save the environment is to improve the economy for these people, and therefore we've got to let them have oil and gas, and they've got to be able to develop and prosper and industrialize. And I thought, it's refreshing to read it, because you can see how this man has evolved over a period of about 2 decades. So, and I think you're seeing that realism pop up here and there among the environmental movement, and it's very, very healthy.
I did want to get your thoughts on kind of a speculative 5,000-foot view thing. You're a trained journalist, and so I kind of respect your mind on that aspect, to kind of layer some things in, which, there is a skill to that. So, and anybody can just do, our armchair quarterbacking, and, you tend to bring a little bit more than just that. So, one of the things I've been tracking is, I call it being defined by defection. One of the concerns I have for the oil and gas industry is that if they're losing 6-figure jobs and laying people off, and my concern is that if the media and the elected officials, for the most part, are allowing this public shaming of oil and gas to happen. If somebody's not being paid six figures a year by an energy company, I don't know if they're going to stand up for them. So I'm concerned that if this layoffs and the momentum happens the way it has been, Greta's got a documentary now on Hulu, just all kinds of different things like that. That
Right.
2021 could be defined by defection, and that to me is the one thing. If I'm the oil and gas industry, I might be keeping an eye on. Just your thoughts on that, I guess.
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. I kind of look at it a slightly different way.
Please do.
In the sense, what I see is the biggest of the companies, like a BP, for example. They are operating under the premise that we need to appease these radicals, and we need to surrender to them on the surface, so that we can continue doing what we've always done, and or we can alternatively find a new place to put some of our money, which is in seeking government rent for solar and wind and other crazy schemes. So that's where I see the problem. The smaller companies don't lean that way, but the bigger companies do. Their attitude is throw some words and some money at them, and we'll be the last eaten by the crocodile, so to speak. And we'll have the opportunity to maybe kill that crocodile. So that's the way these bigger companies think, and I do think that's a threat. When I see BP just selling its soul, really, to the radical environmentalists and generating all this stuff, which is then used against the industry, it's very cynical on their part, because they know that it's going to kill some of the smaller companies that are their competitors. So you can appreciate that dynamic, and
actually I can, and I was going to actually offer you a example that. I sent you the link to the transcript for the industrial forest, and
I loved it.
And actually the reason that the industrial forest was created, it was partially created to help the industry with some PR. That whole thing. Hey, look at us. We're developing this network of forests, and and each tree will be sponsored by an industry company, and that's not new, that type of thing. What's new about the industrial forest that nobody else is doing is, did you know half of the trees that were planted in the last 20 years by these nonprofit tree planting organizations, or even your city government, over half of them have died? So
sure.
Yeah, they're not watering them every day. They're not doing the things that you need to do in order to sustain them. So they do exactly what you just mentioned BP and some of the big corporations are doing. They're just platituding it, flying in their private jets, talk about, hey, we save the environment, and fly out on their private jets. So with the industrial forest, we actually are going to some of these oil and gas companies now and saying, you need to find out what the sustainability plan is for these tree planting companies, because XYZ Energy Company, you have a 90-page sustainability plan now to give to your shareholders. Somebody's going to call out your bullshit pretty soon. And it's starting to happen. And that's why we decided to partner with the industrial forest, because they're adding that sustainability aspect, which is every one of these forests, they're going to have a shed built so that there's always going to be water for the first year on these. So they're going to build a critical pipeline system. Don't you like that Orwellian term?
Yeah, I love it.
Critical pipeline system. Well, when you think about it, though, the critical pipeline system is actually going to save the trees from dying. So we're going to use the oil and gas industry to save the earth. And I love it, because I'm like, look at this. Here's another problem that the planet of platitudes created, and the realm of reality known as industry is going to solve another problem. I love it. It's just, you can't make it up.
this gets back to something you and I have talked about before in other programs we've done together, and that is that the oil and gas industry is tremendously responsive to things and adaptive in the sense that there's a challenge that arises, they jump up and meet it, and typically with a very practical type of solution, and you don't see that in a lot of things, particularly in politics. Nobody's practical in politics, and it's so heartwarming and refreshing to work in the industry, or know people in the industry, I should say, I guess, that just approach everything like a challenge to be solved. And I'm talking about not the BPs of the world, but I'm talking about the Cabots and some of those companies that just say, oh, we got this problem. Well, here, let's do this, that kind of a thing. And you and I have talked about that many times. And it's just one of the features of the industry that is just so attractive to me. And you don't see that in so many things. And it's really a wonder. I often think this. It's a wonder the world survives, given all the dishonesty, as you say, the platitudes, all the phoniness of so many things, and yet somehow it survives. And I think it survives because of, in my mind, basic cultural values that we've inherited, but also because of this reservoir of talent with people who know how to do things, okay, and who just cut through the BS. So that's my view.
The one thing that I've seen about the oil and gas industry, this is really what drew me to the oil and gas industry, is just the sheer capitalism it brings. And anytime that you can have a roughneck with maybe a high school education, but he just happens to be a really talented, instinctive engineer. And every day looking at a vibrating tube for 5 years, he figures out how to make that vibrating tube go twice as fast for twice as cheap.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, a year later, that barely high school graduation's the CEO and president of a 15-man operation with a small little shop and everything. God bless America, baby. I love that. That's just my kind of...
I do too.
Yeah,
I
because...
do too. There's a company out here that is now making some waves in western Pennsylvania called CNX. And CNX is led by a guy by the name of Nick DeLulius, I think is the way you pronounce his name. And if you have a chance, check him out, the CEO of CNX, which is he's just such an outspoken guy, and his history is exactly like that. Raised in a blue-collar, family, and has risen to become the CEO of this company, and completely unafraid to call it the way it is. I urge you and your listeners to check him out. He's got several speeches that are online. He's just written a book called Leeches, which is a tome on the whole idea that people are trying to live off sucking up government rent rather than being true capitalists. So wonderful guy, and really, to me, the epitome of the kind of American we need to produce a lot more of.
And what was his name again?
Nick DeLulius. It's a funny name. It's Nicholas DeLulius. I think it's DELULLIS, something like that.
With a D. With a D.
Yeah, with a D.
Yeah. Okay, because there was an old Jeff Gillooly, and anybody who's ever watched Letterman from the 90s and 2000s knows that name, Jeff Gillooly.
Oh yeah.
But it was DeLulius.
Yeah, well, check him out. Yeah. All you need to do is go to CNX, and he has his own site too for his book, and puts out columns, and he's done a number of great speeches. And I would direct all your listeners to check him out, because he's got some wonderful things to say about America, about the oil and gas industry, and about the climate movement, so to speak. I forget the term he uses, but it's not an endearing term. Okay, and about the whole climate movement, and what it really is. So check him out.
I tell you, it is an interesting movement. Terry Edom, a good friend up in Calgary, Canada, he's the author of The End of the Fossil Fuel Insanity. He calls them climate activists. And that's
Yeah.
probably the most accurate term I've heard for a journalist to use.
Uh-huh.
And instead of environmentalists and that sort of thing, because like he was pointing out years ago, most of the people in the energy industry are the number one environmentalists he's ever met. And he's being serious, he's not being
Yeah,
facetious.
sure.
And that sort of, well, I don't know too many environmentalists that are, making cars cleaner and that sort of thing. I had a conversation earlier with a state senator in Colorado. They got some real issues in Colorado now with this new
Oh, yeah.
this new special interest group that's disguised as a government agency.
I know.
Holy smokes! Did you see that email? That news story where they sent out an email accidentally where they have code names for all the oil companies with derogatory names.
No, I did not see that. No.
So the state government agency, that's what they're doing. Instead of Devon Oil, it's Snake Oil, snake and things, right? And that's a government agency doing that. And to me, I look at that, and that's why I say it's almost more of a special interest group appointed by the governor, because that just shows the tone of it. But anyway, we were talking earlier about, I lived out in California for a year, going to school out there at Fullerton. And boy, I was in Santa Monica, and I didn't even know there was a mountain right next to it because there was so much smog. And he brought up back when he was living in Denver, the brown cloud. And, Pittsburgh used to have that old steel mill industry vibe about it. I guess that's what we were told and everything. Just in my lifetime, I personally have seen the innovations clean the air, from the cars to the steel mills to, you name it. And it's amazing that more people haven't absorbed that, I guess.
Well, visit a well pad. I mean, you can see all the precautions they're taking with all the procedures and the way it's laid out to make sure nothing leaves that site. I mean, it's pretty incredible, and more people should do that. More people should visit these things and see what they're all about and how the precautions they take. It's amazing.
Well, what do you guys got planned for in the near future here? How can people support your business? And let's find out a little bit about natural gas now as we conclude here.
Yeah, sure. Well, natural gas now has been around since 2013, and we put out about usually a couple of posts a day, except Sunday now. I've kind of given up on Sundays, but because I decided I need a little break. But we normally put out about 2 posts a day, and we're very much an advocate for the natural gas industry. Now, I do look at other industries. We look at oil, for example. We spend a lot of time examining the falsehoods behind the renewable industry too. Because I think that's essential for people to understand. This is a big scam, a lot of it. I'm not against solar per se. I mean, somebody wants to put solar panels on the roof. It's good for them, but don't ask me to pay for it. And we do a lot just analyzing the economics of it, and a lot of educational things, I think, where we talk about the fact that what's key is not just energy, but you have to have dispatchable energy that you can call on within an hour and it'll be there. And that only happens with things like nuclear energy, oil and gas, hydroelectric, although we can't do much more of that in the country because the environmental opposition to new dams is tremendous. So it really comes down to nuclear or oil and gas. And nuclear has its own set of opponents. It's not particularly economic, which is why they're now in the subsidy game. They've kind of joined solar and wind and trying to suck up that government rent. So oil and gas is ultimately the best solution for dispatchable energy that you can call upon when you need it. If you're going to do solar or wind, you can in some cases do it, and maybe someday you'll be able to do it economically. We're not there yet, I can assure you that, but maybe someday we'll be able to do it. But until there's actually the ability to store large-scale amounts of energy, I mean really large-scale, you've got to have an alternative source which is dispatchable, that can be called upon in the moment you need it. And that has to come from oil and gas, which is the one thing that you can do that. You can turn it on within an hour, typically. You're going to have more energy. So you can't do storage right now. And I know there's a lot of proposals out there and a lot of people saying it's coming. We're going to have 300 megawatts of storage or this or that. But you need a massive amount of it, and it's not feasible. I mean, even Bill Gates, who I'm no fan of, says, when you really sit down and analyze it, there's just no way. It can't work. It's ancient technology, really. So that's where I stand on it.